sometimes the most powerful people are the ones nobody notices. They mop floors while million-dollar deals happen above their heads. They empty trash cans while executives plot careers. They smile politely while being treated like furniture. But what happens when someone finally sees them? Really sees them? Maya Chen thought she was just standing up for what was right when she defended the quiet janitor everyone called Old Joe. She had no idea she was about to discover that the most underestimated person in the building had been hiding secrets that would change everything she thought she knew about strength, respect, and what it really means to fight for something. In a world where power is measured by corner offices and designer suits, sometimes the real warriors wear maintenance uniforms and carry mop buckets. And, sometimes, it takes a sparring mat to reveal who's really been fighting the hardest battle all along. This is the story of what happened when laughter turned to silence, when assumptions crumbled like paper, and when a young woman learned that defending someone can teach you more about yourself than you ever imagined possible. Maya Chen had always believed that respect was something you earned, not something you demanded. At 26, she had worked her way up from an entry-level position at Meridian Financial to a junior analyst role, and she took pride in treating everyone with the same courtesy, regardless of their job title. That's why what happened in the break room that Tuesday morning made her stomach turn. She was refilling her coffee mug when she heard the laughter. Sharp, cruel laughter that made her skin crawl. At the center of it stood Brandon Mitchell, one of the senior analysts, his voice carrying that particular tone of superiority that some people wore like expensive cologne. "I'm telling you guys, it's hilarious," Brandon was saying to his small audience of junior executives. "The old man actually thinks he knows about business. Yesterday, I caught him reading the Financial Times during his break. Can you imagine? Like he could even understand what's happening in the markets." Maya's hand tightened around her coffee mug as she realized who they were talking about. Joe Mendoza, the evening janitor who had worked at Meridian for over 15 years. She had always exchanged pleasant greetings with Joe when she worked late. He was a quiet man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that made him seem almost invisible to most of the office. "Maybe he's just interested in learning," suggested Sarah, one of the newer hires, but her voice was uncertain, as if she was testing the waters. Brandon laughed louder. "Learning? Sarah, the guy pushes a mop for a living. Trust me, he's not going to suddenly become Warren Buffett because he reads the business section. It's like watching a monkey try to perform surgery." The comparison hit Maya like a physical blow. She had seen Joe many times over the past 2 years, always working quietly, always polite, always thorough in his job. The idea of reducing him to something less than human because of his occupation made anger rise in her throat like bile. "That's enough," Maya said, her voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. The group turned to look at her, surprise written across their faces. Brandon's eyebrows rose in amusement, as if he couldn't believe someone was actually challenging him. "Excuse me?" Brandon said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I said that's enough," Maya repeated, stepping closer to the group. "Joe Mendoza is a human being who deserves basic respect, not your ridiculous comparisons to animals." Brandon's friends exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension in the room. But Brandon himself seemed energized by the confrontation, his smile growing wider. "Oh, I see," he said, nodding slowly. "Maya's defending her janitor friend. How sweet. Tell me, Maya, do you really think someone who cleans toilets for a living has anything valuable to contribute to conversations about finance?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could feel her heart beating faster, but she refused to back down. She thought about all the times she had seen Joe working late into the night, the careful attention he paid to his job, the way he always had a kind word for everyone, regardless of how they treated him. "I think," Maya said slowly, "that you have no idea what Joe knows or doesn't know, because you've never bothered to have an actual conversation with him. You've decided he's beneath you based on his job, and that says a lot more about you than it does about him." Brandon's smile faltered for just a moment, but then it returned, sharper than before. "You know what, Maya? You're right. I haven't had deep conversations with the janitor, because I have better things to do with my time. Unlike some people, I focus on building my career instead of making friends with the help." The word help landed like a slap. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but not from embarrassment. From pure, clean anger. His name is Joe, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Joe Mendoza. He's been working here longer than any of us, and he does his job better than most people in this office do theirs. If you can't see the value in that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't understand business. The break room had gone completely silent. Even the coffee machine seemed to have stopped brewing. Brandon's face was flushed now, his casual superiority replaced by something harder and more defensive. Listen, Maya, he said, stepping closer to her. I don't know what fantasy world you're living in, but this is the real world. People have their places, and someone who cleans floors for 15 years clearly hasn't figured out how to rise above his station. If you want to waste your time playing savior to someone who's never going to amount to anything, that's your choice. But don't lecture the rest of us about respecting mediocrity. That was the moment something shifted in Maya. She had spent her entire career trying to fit in, trying to prove herself worthy of respect in a world that seemed determined to rank people by their paychecks and job titles. But, standing there, listening to Brandon reduce a decent man to nothing more than his job description, she realized that fitting in wasn't worth becoming the kind of person who could dismiss someone's humanity so casually. You know what, Brandon? Maya said, her voice steady now. You're absolutely right about one thing. This is the real world. And, in the real world, character matters more than your position on an organizational chart. Joe shows up every day, does honest work, and treats people with kindness. You show up every day and tear people down to make yourself feel bigger. Between the two of you, I know who I'd rather have on my side in any situation that actually mattered. Brandon's face went through several different expressions before settling on something that looked like genuine anger. That's a pretty bold statement from someone who's never been tested, he said. It's easy to talk about character when you've never had to prove anything real about yourself. What's that supposed to mean? Maya asked. Brandon glanced around the room, as if making sure he had an audience for whatever he was about to say. I mean that you've spent your whole career hiding behind politeness and political correctness. You talk a big game about respecting people, but you've never actually had to back up your words with actions. You defend the janitor because it makes you feel good about yourself, not because you actually understand what real strength looks like. The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. Maya had always prided herself on being diplomatic, on finding peaceful solutions to conflicts. She had never been the type to seek out confrontations or prove herself through displays of force. But something about Brandon's smugness, his certainty that she was all talk and no substance, made her want to prove him wrong. And, you think you know what real strength looks like? She asked. Brandon's smile returned, but this time it was different. Predatory. As a matter of fact, I do. I've been training in mixed martial arts for the past 5 years. I compete in amateur tournaments. I know the difference between people who talk tough and people who can actually back it up. Maya felt a moment of uncertainty. She had taken some self-defense classes in college, but that was years ago. She jogged regularly and did yoga, but that hardly qualified as fight training. But then, she thought about Joe, about the way Brandon had talked about him, and the uncertainty transformed into something else. Determination. Interesting, Maya said. So you think that being able to fight makes you better than Joe? I think being able to defend yourself and prove your worth makes you better than someone who's content to stay invisible his whole life, Brandon replied. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, not because they hurt her, but because they revealed something ugly about Brandon's worldview. He genuinely believed that people like Joe were lesser beings, and he thought his ability to throw punches somehow proved his superiority. You really believe that, don't you? Maya asked. You think that physical strength is the same thing as worth as a human being? I think that strength, physical, mental, emotional, matters, Brandon said. And I think people who've never been tested have no business lecturing others about character. Maya looked around the break room. Everyone was staring at them now, waiting to see how this would play out. She could walk away. She could let Brandon have the last word and go back to her desk. She could let him continue believing that Joe was somehow less valuable because he didn't fit Brandon's definition of strength. But she couldn't. Not anymore. You want to test strength? Maya asked. Fine. Let's test it. Brandon blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What are you talking about? You think I'm all talk, Maya said. You think Joe is weak because he doesn't fight back when people like you disrespect him. You think physical ability equals worth. So let's find out what strength really looks like. Maya, Sarah said quietly, maybe you should just let this go. But Maya wasn't listening to Sarah anymore. She was looking directly at Brandon, who was starting to look less confident and more confused. What exactly are you suggesting? Brandon asked. Your gym, Maya said. The one where you train. Does it have sparring mats? Brandon's confusion deepened. Yes, but then, let's settle this there, Maya said. You can show me what real strength looks like, and I'll show you what defending someone actually means. The break room erupted in whispers and nervous laughter. Someone muttered, "This is crazy," under their breath. But Maya kept her eyes locked on Brandon, waiting for his response. Brandon looked around the room, clearly realizing that he had painted himself into a corner. He had spent the last 10 minutes bragging about his fighting skills and questioning Maya's courage. Now she was calling his bluff, and backing down would make him look like a coward in front of their colleagues. You're serious? He asked. Completely serious, Maya replied. Brandon was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded slowly. Fine. Saturday afternoon at Powerhouse Gym on 5th Street. 2 o'clock. But don't blame me when you realize that good intentions aren't the same thing as actual ability. I won't, Maya said. Will you? Before Brandon could respond, Maya turned and walked out of the break room, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She had just challenged a trained fighter to prove a point about respecting a janitor. She had no idea what she was doing, but she knew she couldn't take it back now. As she walked back to her desk, one thought kept running through her mind. She had 3 days to figure out how to back up the biggest stand she had ever taken in her life. Maya spent the rest of Tuesday in a state of controlled panic. Every time she tried to focus on her work, her mind drifted back to the break room confrontation and the promise she had made. By Wednesday morning, the entire office seemed to know about the upcoming match. People whispered when she walked by, some looking at her with admiration, others with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for car accidents. She was reviewing quarterly reports when someone knocked softly on her cubicle wall. Maya looked up to find Joe Mendoza standing there, his maintenance cart beside him, his expression serious. Miss Maya, he said quietly, could I speak with you for a moment? Maya's stomach dropped. Joe had never approached her at her desk before. She wondered how much he had heard about what happened in the break room. Of course, she said, standing up. Would you like to talk somewhere private? Joe nodded, and Maya led him to one of the small conference rooms. As soon as the door closed behind them, Joe's formal demeanor shifted slightly. I heard what happened yesterday, he said without preamble. About the argument with Mr. Mitchell. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Joe, I'm sorry you had to hear about that. I know I probably made things awkward for you. Joe held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. You don't need to apologize, he said. What you did, standing up for me like that, nobody's done anything like that for me in a long time. Maya looked at him more closely. In the fluorescent lighting of the conference room, she could see details she had never noticed before. Joe's hands were scarred and calloused, but they were also steady and strong. His shoulders were broader than his work uniform made them appear. There was something in his posture that suggested physical capability, though it was carefully hidden beneath his mild-mannered exterior. But, Joe continued, I also heard about the challenge. About Saturday. Maya nodded, feeling foolish. I know it probably seems stupid. I couldn't let him talk about you like that. Joe was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Miss Maya, can I ask you something? Of course. Have you ever been in a real fight before? The question was asked so gently that it took Maya a moment to process how serious it was. She shook her head. Not really. I took a self-defense class in college, but that was just basic stuff. Nothing like what Brandon does. Joe nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. Mr. Mitchell trains at Powerhouse Gym. I know because my nephew works there as a trainer. Brandon's been competing for several years. He's not just playing around. Maya felt her stomach sink. I know I'm probably in over my head, she admitted. But I can't back down now. Not after what he said about you. Joe looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his features. What if I told you there might be another way to look at this situation? What do you mean? Joe glanced toward the door, as if making sure they wouldn't be overheard. What if I told you that Mr. Mitchell doesn't know everything he thinks he knows about the people in this building? Maya frowned. I don't understand. Joe was quiet for another moment, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. Finally, he spoke. Miss Maya, can I trust you with something? Yes, absolutely. Joe took a deep breath. My full name is Jose Mendoza. But, before I started working here, before I started cleaning buildings, I had a different life. I was a boxing trainer. Professional level. I worked with fighters who went on to win regional championships, some who fought nationally. Maya stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. You were a boxing trainer? For 22 years, Joe said. I had my own gym in El Paso. I trained kids from the neighborhood, some professional fighters, military personnel. I was good at it. What happened? Maya asked softly. Joe's expression darkened slightly. My wife got sick. Cancer. The medical bills, they took everything. The gym, our house, our savings. After she died, I moved here to be closer to my sister's family. I needed steady work with health insurance, something reliable. Meridian offered me a job, and I took it. Maya felt like the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Joe, I had no idea. Nobody does, Joe said. I don't talk about it because it doesn't matter anymore. That life is over. This is my life now, and I'm grateful for it. But, when I heard about Saturday, when I heard that you're going to face someone like Mr. Mitchell because you defended me. He shook his head. I can't let you walk into that unprepared. Maya's mind was racing. Are you saying you want to help me? Joe nodded. If you'll let me. I know it's only 3 days, but I can teach you some things. Enough to maybe surprise Mr. Mitchell. Enough to show him that he doesn't know as much about strength as he thinks he does. Maya felt a surge of hope mixed with uncertainty. But, won't people think it's strange if they see us together? I mean, if Brandon finds out you're helping me. Joe smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him in their conversation. Miss Maya, Mr. Mitchell and his friends think I'm invisible. They don't see me when I'm working right next to them. Trust me, they won't notice if I'm helping you prepare. Maya looked at Joe with new eyes. The quiet janitor she thought she was defending had just revealed himself to be someone completely different. Someone with skills and experience she couldn't have imagined. Someone who was offering to help her because she had stood up for him when no one else would. What would we do? She asked. There's a small gym in my neighborhood, Joe said. Very basic, but it has everything we need. My nephew Carlos runs it now. If you're willing to trust me, we can start tonight. Maya nodded without hesitation. Yes. Absolutely yes. Joe's smile widened. Good. Meet me at Guerrero's gym on Maple Street at 7 o'clock. Wear clothes you can move in. And, Miss Maya? Yes? Bring everything you have. Courage, determination, everything. Because what we're going to do in the next 3 days isn't just about preparing you to fight Mr. Mitchell. It's about showing you what kind of strength you already have inside you. That evening, Maya stood outside Guerrero's gym feeling more nervous than she had in years. The building was small and weathered, with a neon sign that flickered between open and op. Through the windows, she could see heavy bags hanging from the ceiling and the familiar outline of a boxing ring. Joe met her at the door, but he looked different. Gone was the maintenance uniform, replaced by old sweatpants and a faded t-shirt that revealed arms and shoulders that were clearly more muscular than his work clothes had suggested. His entire demeanor had changed too. He moved with more confidence, more purpose. "Ready?" he asked. Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for anything. Inside, the gym smelled like sweat and determination. A few people were working out, some hitting heavy bags, others jumping rope. A young man who looked like a younger version of Joe approached them. "Maya, this is my nephew Carlos," Joe said. "Carlos, this is Miss Maya from my work." Carlos shook her hand with a grip that was firm but not intimidating. "Uncle Joe told me what happened," he said. "What you did was brave." "Stupid maybe, but brave." Maya couldn't help but laugh. "Thanks, I think." "Don't worry," Carlos continued. "If anyone can get you ready in 3 days, it's Uncle Joe. I've seen him work miracles with people who thought they couldn't fight." Joe led Maya to a corner of the gym where mats were spread out on the floor. "Okay," he said, "first thing we need to do is see what you're working with. Show me how you stand when you feel threatened." Maya assumed what she thought was a fighting stance, fists raised awkwardly in front of her face. Joe shook his head gently. "Relax. You're trying too hard to look like a fighter instead of being ready to fight. Here, watch." Joe settled into a stance that looked casual but balanced. His hands were up, but not rigid. His feet were positioned in a way that suggested he could move quickly in any direction. "Fighting isn't about looking tough," Joe explained. "It's about being ready to respond to whatever comes at you. Balance, timing, and understanding your opponent's weaknesses. Those matter more than pure strength." For the next hour, Joe worked with Maya on basic footwork and positioning. He was patient but demanding, correcting her stance over and over until her movements started to feel more natural. "Good," he said finally. "You learn quickly. Now, let's talk about what you're really facing on Saturday." Joe gestured for Maya to sit on a bench beside the ring. "Mr. Mitchell thinks he knows what kind of fight this is going to be. He expects you to come in scared, maybe throw a few wild punches, and then quit when you realize you're outmatched." "Isn't that probably what's going to happen?" Maya asked. Joe shook his head. "Not if we prepare you right. See, Mr. Mitchell has been training in mixed martial arts, which is good training, but it also means he's learned to fight in a specific way. He's probably used to opponents who fight back with the same techniques he knows. He's not expecting someone who fights differently." "What do you mean?" "Boxing is different from MMA," Joe explained. "It's more focused, more about precision and timing than about using every possible technique. If we can teach you to box smart, to use your speed and intelligence instead of trying to match his strength, you might surprise him." Maya felt a flicker of hope. "You really think I have a chance?" Joe looked at her seriously. "Miss Maya, you stood up to a bully when nobody else would. You're here right now, willing to learn, even though you're scared. You've already shown more real strength than Mr. Mitchell has in all his years of training. Now we just need to teach your body what your spirit already knows." They spent the next 2 hours working on basic punches, footwork, and defense. Joe was relentless but encouraging, pushing Maya to move faster, hit harder, think quicker. By the time they finished, Maya was exhausted but exhilarated. "Tomorrow we work on strategy," Joe said as they walked to the parking lot. "And, Maya?" "Yes?" "What you're doing, it matters. Not just for Saturday, but for everyone who's ever been dismissed because of their job or their background. You're fighting for something bigger than just proving a point to Mr. Mitchell." As Maya drove home that night, she thought about what Joe had said. She was fighting for something bigger. She was fighting for the idea that respect shouldn't depend on job titles or social status. She was fighting for Joe, for herself, and for everyone who had ever been underestimated because they didn't fit someone else's definition of strength. Thursday and Friday passed in a blur of intensive training. Joe worked with Maya for 3 hours each evening, teaching her combinations, defensive moves, and, most importantly, how to think strategically during a fight. Carlos joined them on Friday, offering tips about reading an opponent's body language and staying calm under pressure. Remember, Joe said on Friday night as they finished their last training session, Mr. Mitchell is expecting you to fight his fight. Don't do that. Make him fight yours. Use your speed, use your brain, and, most importantly, remember why you're doing this. Maya nodded, feeling as ready as she could possibly be given the circumstances. She was still scared, but it was a different kind of fear now. Not the paralyzing terror of facing the unknown, but the sharp, focused fear of someone who knew exactly what she was walking into and was determined to give it everything she had. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Maya woke up feeling surprisingly calm. She had breakfast, did some light stretching, and spent an hour reviewing the techniques Joe had taught her. At 1 o'clock, she drove to Powerhouse Gym, her heart steady and her mind clear. It was time to show Brandon Mitchell what strength really looked like. Powerhouse Gym was everything Maya had expected and more. The moment she walked through the doors, she was hit by the sound of metal clanging against metal, heavy breathing, and the rhythmic thud of gloves hitting heavy bags. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and determination. This was clearly a serious training facility, not a place where weekend warriors came to feel tough. Brandon was already there, talking to a small group of people near the sparring area. Maya recognized a few faces from the office, people who had apparently come to watch what they probably expected to be a complete mismatch. Brandon was wearing professional-looking gear and moved with the confidence of someone completely in his element. Maya took a deep breath and walked toward the group. As she approached, conversation stopped, and she could feel eyes evaluating her. She was wearing simple workout clothes and carried a small bag with the protective gear Joe had insisted she borrow from Guerrero's gym. Well, Brandon said, his voice carrying that same condescending tone from the break room. I have to admit, Maya, I'm surprised you actually showed up. I thought you might come to your senses and realize this was a bad idea. Maya looked at him steadily. I told you I would be here. I keep my promises. Brandon's smile was sharp. We'll see how long that attitude lasts. Have you ever actually been in a real sparring session before? No, Maya admitted. But then, again, I've never backed down from doing what I thought was right before either. Someone in Brandon's group snickered, but Maya ignored it. She was focused on Brandon, watching the way he moved, the way he held himself. Joe had taught her to observe her opponent, to look for patterns and habits that she could exploit. The gym manager, a thick-set man with graying hair, approached them. All right, folks, he said in a voice that suggested he had broken up more than his fair share of conflicts. I understand we have a sparring session happening here, but I want to make sure everyone understands the rules. This is light sparring only. No full contact, no trying to prove anything beyond basic technique. Anyone who gets carried away gets thrown out of my gym permanently. Brandon nodded, but Maya could see the frustration in his eyes. He had clearly been hoping for something more intense than light sparring. That's fine with me, Maya said. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm just here to prove a point. And what point is that? Brandon asked. Maya looked at him directly. That respect doesn't come from being able to hit harder than the next person. It comes from having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're outmatched. Brandon's expression darkened. Pretty words, Maya. Let's see if you can back them up. They moved to the sparring area, a raised platform surrounded by ropes. Maya began putting on her protective gear, trying to project calm confidence while her heart hammered in her chest. As she was adjusting her headgear, she saw a familiar figure enter the gym. Joe Mendoza walked in quietly, wearing civilian clothes and carrying himself with that same unassuming demeanor he had at the office. He caught Maya's eye and gave her a small nod of encouragement. Nobody else seemed to notice him, which Maya realized was exactly how Joe preferred it. Ready? Brandon asked, bouncing slightly on his feet as he settled into his stance. Maya nodded and moved to the center of the platform. The gym manager rang a small bell, and the sparring began. Brandon came forward immediately, not aggressively, but with the confidence of someone who expected to end this quickly. He threw a few light jabs, testing Maya's reflexes and defensive abilities. Maya moved the way Joe had taught her, staying balanced, keeping her guard up, focusing on watching Brandon's shoulders to anticipate his punches. The first few exchanges went as expected. Brandon was clearly more experienced, his movements smoother and more instinctive. But Maya held her own, using her footwork to avoid his stronger attacks and landing a few light counterpunches when he overextended. Not bad, Brandon admitted after the first minute. But let's see how you handle this. He increased his pace, throwing combinations that were still within the rules of light sparring but clearly designed to overwhelm Maya's defenses. This was where Joe's training proved invaluable. Instead of panicking or trying to match Brandon's intensity, Maya focused on what Joe had taught her about fighting smart. She began moving more, making Brandon work to close the distance between them. When he committed to longer combinations, she slipped to the side and countered with quick, precise punches that scored points without exposing her to his stronger attacks. She was fighting her fight, not his. After 3 minutes, the gym manager called for a break. Brandon was breathing harder than Maya, clearly frustrated that the quick victory he had expected wasn't materializing. "You're better than I thought you'd be," he admitted grudgingly. "Someone's been training you." Maya glanced toward Joe, who was watching from the edge of the crowd with an expression of quiet pride. "I've had a good teacher," she said simply. "Well, it doesn't matter," Brandon said, his competitive nature taking over. "You're still fighting someone with 5 years of experience. This next round, I'm going to show you the difference between basic training and real skill." Maya nodded, but she wasn't intimidated anymore. If anything, Brandon's frustration was giving her confidence. Joe had told her that angry fighters made mistakes, and she could see Brandon's careful technique starting to give way to ego. The second round began differently. Brandon came forward more aggressively, clearly determined to assert his dominance. But, as Joe had predicted, his increased aggression also meant increased sloppiness. He was throwing harder punches, but they were less controlled, less precise. Maya adapted, using her speed to avoid his power shots and capitalizing on the openings his frustration created. She landed several clean counter-punches that drew approving murmurs from the watching crowd. More importantly, she could see doubt creeping into Brandon's eyes. Halfway through the second round, something shifted. Brandon threw a hard right hand that missed Maya's head by inches, and, in his follow-through, he left himself completely exposed. Maya saw the opening and reacted instinctively, landing a picture-perfect left hook to his ribs that made him grunt and step back. The punch wasn't hard enough to do real damage, but it was perfectly timed and placed. It was the kind of punch that announced to everyone watching that the supposedly inexperienced fighter knew exactly what she was doing. Brandon's face flushed red, and Maya could see him struggling with the realization that he was not dominating this fight the way he had expected to. His next attack was wilder, more desperate, and Maya slipped it easily before landing another clean counter that snapped his head back slightly. The crowd was getting more engaged now, sensing that they were watching something unexpected. Maya heard someone say, "Where did she learn to do that?" and felt a surge of pride for Joe, whose patient teaching was being vindicated with every successful technique. As the second round wound down, Brandon was clearly rattled. His breathing was labored, his technique was sloppy, and his confidence was cracking. Maya, meanwhile, felt like she was just getting started. All those hours of training with Joe were paying off, but, more than that, she was fighting with a sense of purpose that gave her strength beyond her physical preparation. The gym manager called for another break, and, this time, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. People were looking at Maya with new respect, and looking at Brandon with something approaching disappointment. "Okay," Brandon said, breathing hard. "Okay, you're better than I expected. But, this last round, I'm not holding back anymore." Maya looked at him calmly. "I never asked you to hold back, Brandon. I asked you to show me what real strength looks like." Brandon's jaw tightened. Fine. You want to see real strength? You're about to. But, as the third round began, it became clear that Brandon's definition of not holding back was leading him exactly where Joe had predicted it would. His punches were harder but wilder, his combinations were more aggressive but less controlled. He was fighting angry, fighting to dominate rather than to demonstrate skill. Maya, meanwhile, was fighting with a clarity she had never experienced before. Every lesson Joe had taught her seemed to flow together seamlessly. She moved when she needed to move, countered when she saw openings, and stayed calm when Brandon tried to overwhelm her with aggression. The turning point came with about a minute left in the round. Brandon, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, threw a overhand right with everything he had behind it. Maya saw it coming from a mile away, slipped under it, and came back with an uppercut that caught Brandon clean on the chin. The punch wasn't devastating, but it was perfect. Brandon's head snapped back, his eyes went wide with surprise, and, for a moment, everyone in the gym went completely silent. Then, Maya did something that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of pressing her advantage, instead of trying to follow up with more punches while Brandon was off balance, she stepped back and lowered her hands. "That's enough," she said quietly. Brandon stared at her, confusion and embarrassment warring on his face. "What are you doing?" Maya looked around the room, making eye contact with the people who had come to watch what they expected to be her humiliation. "I came here to prove a point," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent gym. "The point wasn't to beat you, Brandon. The point was to show that strength isn't about being able to hurt someone. It's about being willing to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves." She turned to look directly at Brandon. "You wanted to know what real strength looks like? It looks like Joe Mendoza, who comes to work every day and does his job with dignity, even when people like you treat him like he's invisible. It looks like choosing to help instead of harm, to build up instead of tear down." Maya began removing her gloves. "I don't need to knock you out to prove my point. I just needed to show that your assumptions about people are wrong. About Joe, about me, about what matters in life." The gym was still completely silent. Brandon stood there, looking like he didn't know whether to be relieved or humiliated. Finally, he spoke. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked quietly. Maya smiled and looked toward Joe, who was still standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. "From someone you never bothered to notice," she said. "Someone who's forgotten more about strength and courage than most of us will ever learn." Joe stepped forward then, moving with the confidence he had shown at Guerrero's gym. Several people in the crowd did double takes as they realized who he was. "Mr. Mitchell," Joe said politely. "Maya is too modest. She learned to fight like that because she has something you can't teach in any gym. She has heart." Brandon stared at Joe, clearly struggling to reconcile the quiet janitor from work with the man who had obviously trained someone to outfight him. You trained her?" Joe nodded. "I did. And it was an honor. Miss Maya, she didn't need to learn how to be strong. She just needed to learn how to show the strength she already had." Brandon looked back and forth between Joe and Maya, and something in his expression shifted. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been shame. He started, then stopped. "I owe you both an apology." Maya shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Brandon. But you might want to think about how you treat people whose stories you don't know." As they left the gym that day, Maya walked beside Joe in comfortable silence. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for training me, but for showing me what real strength looks like." Joe smiled. "Miss Maya, you showed me something too. You showed me that there are still people willing to fight for what's right, even when they don't have to." They parted ways in the parking lot, but Maya knew their relationship had changed forever. On Monday morning, when she went back to work, she would see Joe differently. More importantly, she would see herself differently. Because she had learned that defending someone isn't just about standing up to bullies. It's about recognizing the strength in people that others refuse to see, and, sometimes, discovering strength in yourself that you never knew existed. 3 months later, Maya was promoted to senior analyst. In her acceptance speech to the team, she talked about the importance of recognizing value in all team members, regardless of their position. Brandon had requested a transfer to a different department, but, before he left, he sought out both Maya and Joe to personally apologize for his behavior. And Joe? Joe continued doing his job with the same dignity and quiet strength he had always shown. But, now, when people saw him in the hallways, they saw him differently. Word had spread about his background, his training expertise, and his role in Maya's sparring success. Several employees had asked him about boxing lessons, and he was considering teaching a self-defense class at the company wellness center. Most importantly, nobody laughed when Maya defended the janitor anymore. Because they had all learned the same lesson she had: sometimes the strongest people are the ones who have nothing left to prove.